Unleash creativity and innovation. Unleash community spirit.
The People's Knowledge Fair and the UWI Open Campus St. Lucia Country Conference 2021 Phase 2 presents Visioning Sustainable Futures, Confronting the Threats of Climate Change and Climate Variability. Tune in to the live opening. Join our virtual conference on the 16th and 17th. That's not all. Experience St. Lucia's first National Honey Bee Show Training Workshop on the 15th and 16th. Come learn from a leading international expert everything you need to know to compete in December in our first ever National Honey Show. Registration is open now. The People's Knowledge Fair and UWI Open Campus St. Lucia Country Conference is brought to you by GEF SGP UNDP, UWI, CYEN, and other corporate partners.
Unleash creativity and innovation.
Good evening to all our listeners and followers on the various platforms. My name is Ember Charles, and I would like to welcome you to the GEF SGP UNDP Knowledge Fair and UWI Open Campus St. Lucia Country Conference for 2020-2021. We are living in an era which some futurists such as Alvin Toffler and Marshall McLuhan spoke of decades ago. It's probably time during the COVID-19 pandemic when we might have the opportunity to become our own futurists and set some theories and philosophies for others who will tune on in the next few decades to speak about what we have done. As we open this country conference, we remember many people who would have been here with us, but for the onslaught of the COVID-19 virus. We remember many of those who have blazed the trail to set their foot on the ground, to do the work to address the issues of our sustainable futures and our climate variability and its impact. As we start this evening, let me acknowledge a number of persons who are joining us. Let me start with Dr. Francis Severin, who is the Deputy Principal of the UWI Open Campus, and members of the Open Campus leadership team, Mr. Giles Romulus, who is the National Coordinator for the GEF Small Grants Program of the UNDP, St. Lucia Country Program, Dr. Cheryl Slowly, Director of Open Campus Country Sites, and also the heads, coordinators, staff of the UWI Open Campus Country Sites, Mrs. Leslie Crane Mitchell, head of UWI Open Campus St. Lucia, and our very energetic lead coordinator for this country conference, Dr. James Fletcher, former Minister for the Public Service, Information, Broadcasting and Sustainable Development, Energy, Science and Technology. We always thought this was a mouthful when he was minister. We are honored, to have him as our keynote speaker for this evening. Members of the GEF SGP UNDP National Steering Committee, St. Lucia, and any other steering committees who may be joining us online, we welcome you. Dr. Christian Walcott, Operations Manager, UWI Center for Biosecurity Studies, Cable Campus. Conference presenters, Guild of Graduates Students Local Chapter, Ms. Chloe Estava, who is joining us. She's chair. The CYEN network members, members of the media on all our platforms, especially invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, welcome to our country conference. And to get us going, let me just invite the representative of the CYEN to lead us in prayer. Darrell?
Good night to all. Hi, good night to all. I'm Darrell Dubois, representing CYEN St. Lucia. I'd like you to please join us in prayer as we recite the prayer for the proceedings tonight. Dear Heavenly Father, as we gather here today, may your presence be felt and known. May you fill us with your spirit of love and peace that transcends all understanding. We are thankful for your holy presence that protects us and keeps us safe. We are thankful for the many blessings that you have bestowed upon us. Lord, we ask you that you guide this evening's proceedings and to open up our minds to understand. Provide us with the strength to take what we have gathered today to spread awareness and to make a difference in our community. Guide our every step and help us to be attentive to your instructions. Continue strengthening our faith and to always look to you for it. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.
Amen. Thank you very much, Ms. Dubois. And let me assure all of you who have joined us from near and far that we have a very enriching and rewarding program, which will be interspersed with some key messages related to our theme using various music genres. Our first speaker this evening, who will deliver some welcome remarks, is the chair of the local coordinating committee of the conference, Mrs. Leslie Crane Michel, who is acting head of UWI Open Campus in Lucia. And Mrs. Michel will bring us some welcome remarks. Leslie?
Thank you very much, Mr. Charles. Good evening to everyone. As acting head of the UWI Open Campus St. Lucia site, it is my pleasure this evening to extend a warm St. Lucian welcome to each and every one of you joining us this evening for the opening of the GEF SGP UNDP Knowledge Fair and the UWI Open Campus St. Lucia Country Conference 2001 Phase 2. Tonight's event and the presentations that will take place over the next 2 days are the culmination of many months of planning and replanning due to an ever-shifting goalpost as preparations continue to be made under the shadow of the COVID-19 pandemic. Over the past year, like so many other organizations, the UWI Open Campus St. Lucia has had to adapt its operations in order to meet the needs of all of its stakeholders, all the while trying to ensure some measure of normality as we pressed forward with as many of our customary events as possible. Hosting this country conference is therefore particularly gratifying, a bold statement that, in spite of the many difficulties and obstacles faced, we remain resilient, steadfastly refusing to hit pause in spite of the continuing pandemic. The theme for this year's conference is Visioning Sustainable Futures, Confronting the Threats of Climate Change and Climate Variability, with a focus on how we as a people can build resilience in the face of this existential threat to our collective futures, a theme that will be expounded upon repeatedly this evening and over the course of the next 2 days. However, this conference is also about the resilience of our little campus and about the power of collaboration, about individuals and organizations rallying round and supporting us when we thought that we might not have been able to pull off this conference. And for this, I am forever grateful. I take this opportunity to thank Mr. Giles Romulus, National Coordinator of the GEF Small Grants Program, for his unwavering support and for embracing the UWI Open Campus St. Lucia as a partner in the GEF SGP UNDP Knowledge Fair. Thank you also to the GEF SGP UNDP for sponsoring our conference. Ours is a long-standing friendship that has grown from strength to strength over the years, and one which we will continue to nurture. I look forward to many more collaborations between our organizations. While this may be our 4th country conference, it is, of course, our very first virtual country conference. And this is only possible because of the local and regional technical teams working quietly in the background to ensure the smooth flow of events. To the extent that our conference is successful, it would have been in large part due to their technical expertise, dedication, and guidance through the process. And so we not only welcome all of you, but ask that you celebrate this milestone with us and join us not just tonight, but for the entire conference, which continues on Tuesday the 16th and Wednesday, 17th February, from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. daily. As in past years, we have put together a stellar list of presenters, both local and regional, starting with tonight's keynote speaker, Dr. James Fletcher, internationally renowned climate change champion. I have no doubt that Dr. Fletcher's presentation will be provocative and that it will set the tone for all other presentations made over the next 2 days. Tomorrow, we will see presentations focused on a range of climate change related topics, including historical and future trends in climate related hazards by Dr. Cedric Van Meerbeek, climate change and economic development implications for SIDS, the case of St. Lucia by Dr. Clarence Henry, who is here with us tonight. St. Lucia's climate policy environment towards concrete action by Ms. Dawn Pierre-Nathaniel. The impact of climate change on fisheries and aquaculture by Ms. Makiba Felix, and climate change and neotropical pollinators, the state of knowledge, policies, and programs in the Caribbean small island states by Lena Denwolf. The day's proceedings will end with a unique presentation by Shareed Mohammed, a PhD candidate in literatures in the English program at the UWI St. Augustine campus. The conference will conclude on day 3 with a sectoral focus on fisheries, forestry, health, and energy. The first presentation will be by Dr. Shelley-Ann Cox on the topic Climate Change, Impacts on Caribbean Fisheries Sector, followed by Ms. Shanna Emmanuel's contribution on climate change and knowledge platforms. Ms. Nicole LaForce Haynes will present on the Lansan or incense tree in St. Lucia, and Ms. Berthia Thomas on pelagic sargassum influxes in the Eastern Caribbean, a St. Lucia case study. And the final presentation of the day will be made by Mr. Crispin Dover on the Eastern Caribbean Solar Challenge. And so, with these few words of welcome and introduction, I wish all of you an enjoyable evening and an enjoyable St. Lucia Country Conference 2021. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Leslie. And our next speaker is Mr. Giles Romulus. Mr. Romulus, I would say, is no stranger to fora like these, but more importantly, as the key partner in this country conference for 2020-21, as Mrs. Crane said, this has been tremendous support for the UWI Country Conference. We are aware that it's virtual this year, and a lot of the sidebars and activities which we normally have will not take place, but we reassure you that the quality of the presentation will make up for what we have lost. Join me now in welcoming Mr. Giles Romulus, National Coordinator for the GEF Small Grants Program, to deliver his remarks. Mr. Romulus.
Thank you, Mr. Charles. Friends and colleagues in St. Lucia and throughout the Caribbean and beyond, it's really a pleasure to partner with the University of the West Indies, my alma mater, both at Mona and Cave Hill. So I feel at home partnering with my the alma mater that gave me so much that I have in terms of my professional development. This evening I'll be presenting on the GEF Small Grants Program to give people a sense of what we're about and the theories that we are working towards and how some of the challenges that we may be encountering as we proceed. But before I do that, I want to recognize the young man who worked with us 3 years ago, Mr. Francis de Lima Libo, who is responsible for co-producing, co-writing the audio and video presentations of the 1.5 to Stay Alive. I think Dr. Fletcher, remember him. He also participated in preparing the spoken word, which I understood is not being presented tonight. But before the proceedings end tonight, you'll hear some of his skillful creative work. A young man from St. Mary's College, I had the opportunity to interact with him while I taught there for a few years. So dedicated to Mr. Libo, Samarian of great repute. Let's begin now. What are the GEF Small Grants UNDP mandate is to address global environmental problems at the community level through the GEF focal areas. And therefore, we are looking at global problems, the climate change problems, the biodiversity problems, the land degradation problems, international waters and pollution problems, sustainable forest management problems, chemicals and increasing toxicity in our soils and in our waters, both coastal and areas beyond national limits as well. And we are doing that through funding projects at 3 different levels: $5,000 level, $50,000 level, and $150,000 level, which are projects that are upscaled. And for each one of those levels of investing, potentially the projects can be double, because every $1 we invest, we encourage our partners to put another dollar on the table. So potentially the first level could be $10,000 and more, the second could be $50,000, $100,000 and more, the third could be $300,000 and more. And we had just recently launched a project on biodiversity and apiculture in excess of $800,000 in 7 countries. Our objectives are to ensure there is environmental sustainability is our undergirding theme, resounding through everything we do, should be sustainable now and in the future. We want to reduce poverty. We want to increase, diversify income streams in a very sustainable manner, and we want to develop capacity. We want to teach people how to improve themselves, develop capacity, empower themselves for action. This is in essence what we are. We are currently in 126 countries, 37 states, 40 LDCs, and we have 15 upgraded countries. These are countries that have invested in excess of $20 million and that have been in the program for over 10 years and beyond. So we are growing international program. We basically, in almost every small island developing state, there is some office that with a national coordinator and a program assistant. In St. Lucia, since we started in 2012, we are also all over the country in terms of investment of projects. The last count, 108 projects in St. Lucia, over 20 million Eastern Caribbean dollars worth of investment, over 12,000 persons trained in various aspects of environmental management and so on. So we are contributing to the sustainable development of St. Lucia, creating employment opportunities, and also reducing negative impacts on the environment. What is our inspiration? Very important to us is Arthur, a son of the soil, and his inspiring words that will reverberate in the future. The fundamental cure for poverty is not money, but knowledge. Insistent knowledge that is transformational, that comes from the bottom and up and up and up and the bottom. But we also have to reflect on our other Nobel Prize winner, Derek Walcott, who warns us that we are losing our culture. We are losing what identifies us as West Indians, as Caribbean people. We are not becoming the civilization that Ralph Gonzalez speaks about, that some of our intellectuals speaks about. And Derek warns us, friendship as a sweating and groaning burden. Modern ecological disaster can happen to human nature. It can lose ritual and custom. When charity declines into nostalgia, we are all reduced. We have lost many species in the Caribbean, including the pelicans in our bays, and many other species we are losing. But importantly, we are losing what defines us as Caribbean. And recently, of course, Prime Minister of Barbados spoke of cultural confidence. Where is that confidence that we need to stand on the world stage and determine our future? Where is that cultural confidence we have in determining what goes where in our country, what can be sold and cannot be sold, what land use we can encourage and not encourage, what investment we need and we don't need? What are those kinds of things? Do we have that kind of confidence to make those decisions? In terms of the knowledge fair, we are developing a model that is evolving. The knowledge fair for us, we have adapted it from the international, how it was first designed. Usually our knowledge fair has 4 significant segments. The first at the top is the policy and advocacy component. And in the last, this is our second knowledge fair. It occurs in the Parliament of St. Lucia. The last time we were able to produce the Cashier's Declaration that got over 2,700 signatures, presented to the government of St. Lucia on sustainable, healthy food, healthy soils, healthy water, and so on. This year, we met in the Parliament and we focused on research and innovation how do we integrate it into sustainable development in St. Lucia? And very soon, a series of videos will be coming out, as well as a publication on how we can best integrate research and innovation at the community level and for various sectors in our society. That was done in November. Then the other component, as we go counterclockwise in the diagram, is ideation. That is where we tease out the research findings from researchers doing work in St. Lucia and in the Caribbean. And that is where the University of the West Indies came in. And you will see that the University of the West Indies fits neatly into the kind of theoretical construct we have for our knowledge fair. And how do we attract people to speak on various topics? And this year, as we are talking of sustainable futures, it fits into our climate change, climate adaptation, focal point areas, and so on. The area that we have yet to fully develop and we'll be developing is the cultural area, finding ways to nurture and develop cultural confidence. It's not simply the music and it's not simply what we eat and so on, but what is in the culture we can tease out and bring into the milieu of discussion so we can build that cultural confidence for our people. Because science alone will not solve the environmental problems we face, the existential crises we face. It will come down to our value system. I think the preamble to the UNESCO convention has it beautifully. A lot of things happen in the hearts of men and women, in fact. And that's where we have to go sometimes to find the reasons. We even perhaps might need a theology of sustainable development first to overcome the future. And then the fourth level is the praxis level, where we have practical projects that are presented, that they're presenting results, presenting the theory, presenting the understanding. And that is where we have the the Caribbean Congress of Beekeepers was held in November. And this week we are training persons for a proposed honey tasting competition that will take place in December. All of that for us focuses on creating knowledge, creating transformational knowledge. And as we know, knowledge can be produced in a deductive way, inductive way, experientially, praxis, traditional knowledge. But importantly, the message and the lesson that we have learned, without constant research and innovation, we shall not survive the future. We need to make research and innovation is a critical element of what we do. What is the Knowledge Fair? It's a policy and advocacy environment where we discuss, and we have discussed in the Parliament of St. Lucia different recommendations. It's a place, a learning and an ideas environment where ideas are presented to the general public on that have been tested, that have been found to work. It's a capacity building environment as well. We are having skills workshops. We are developing people's skills in new areas and the areas that already exists, but we can improve. It's an exchange environment. It's a marketplace where our grantees can sell some of their produce, some of their skills, some of the services to the broader community. But importantly, there's a positive psychological environment. And I want to emphasize that because we have found as we work with poor people around St. Lucia, breaking that psychological barrier is perhaps one of the most difficult things. We have gone into places where we have the resources, both financial and technical, and the people are almost immobilized by the historical dependence and the political system that encourages mendicancy and also dependence and so on. We have to find ways to break down that psychological dependence, almost like a barrier that prevents them from making a quantum leap where they can make decisions on their own to affect the future. If we're talking about sustainable futures, that is an important area we have to work in and develop for small island developing states like St. Lucia. But there's an admonition. AFA again warns us, we cannot just work within a box of our own West Indianness. We shall achieve nothing. We can't talk about cultural forces and independence without looking beyond the shores of the Caribbean. And this is where I have put this up. This is, you're the first to see this. We now have a science workshop in the southwest coast of St. Lucia. The first smart FAD is in the process of being designed. It will be connected to satellite technology. It is a collaboration between between the sole proprietorship in the village of Labrie, the Goodwill Fishermen's Cooperative in St. Lucia in Vieux-Fort, Microsoft company in Washington State, Microsoft company also the extension in Asia. Very soon we'll be testing that in the territorial waters of St. Lucia. It will be driven by solar. It will be communicating every 5 seconds through technology, and it will not be lost. It will be defined, there'll be a geofencing and so on. High technology between a small community group, one of the biggest multinational corporations in the world, coming to solve a food security issue, and also will significantly reduce our footprint because we would know specifically where the smart fan is located. So partnerships are therefore very important to what we do in the future, and that occurs at the civil society level, the government level, the higher educational level like UWI. We have been going to talk to Arizona State University now, private sector, bilateral and multilateral agencies, multinational corporations, not only Microsoft we are talking to other multinational corporations as well for our UN offices in New York. And we want to begin to attract researchers, particularly Caribbean researchers, students from St. Lucia from the Caribbean, who can come and interpret the vast amount of data that is there in our shells that have not been fully synthesized into knowledge products for our people in St. Lucia and the rest of the Caribbean. Therefore, here we have the Small Grants Program working, trying to address global environmental problems at the community level in a very participatory way, and hoping that we can bring our Caribbean people to a different level where there's a lot of independent thought when decision-making is based on what our needs are and not forced upon us by external stimuli. Thank you very much for the few minutes of presentation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Romulus. And I think you set the context in which we were losing resources, as our Calypsonians would say, we're losing ground. And the efforts at the GEF SGP program to try to regain ground. But of course, there's much more than that. And this is where UWI comes in, trying to regain the intellectual ground that we have been losing through migration, and sometimes through the apathy of our own people who have practically given up because we have lost so much ground. But there's lots of work to be done. Our next item on the program this evening is a presentation of a short video on climate action. And we will now invite you to join this video before we move to our next speakers.
Imagine the world without a Caribbean. Imagine a future with pinnacled remnants of these islands, like sculptures floating on a sea of debris. In the second decade of the 21st century, the Caribbean is once more in a fight for its continued existence, having battled forces of imperialism for centuries. The region must now confront the devastating impacts of global warming and climate change. Viewed largely as a region of high middle-income countries, the Caribbean has limited access to external funding. Pockets of poverty persist and are as deep as income disparities are wide. Hurricanes, natural disasters, and climatic events make no distinction between richer and poorer countries. While visitors to our islands may see sargassum as an inconvenience, for those who live and work here, the degraded coastlines and ecosystems are crippling livelihoods. For us, the effects of climate change are not a seasonal problem, but a matter of survival. The University of the West Indies, a post-colonial light rising from the West for over 7 decades, has produced outstanding political and professional leaders and has guided the region along its pathway to development. With a global record of path-breaking scientific research, we stand at the forefront of the science on environmental resource management, climate modeling, natural disasters, land and marine ecosystems. We are ranked by Times Higher Education in the top 4% of over 28,000 universities in the world, serving 50,000 students across 17 Caribbean countries with global centers on 5 continents. We affirm our vision of a prosperous and sustainable planet through our teaching, research, advocacy, and partnerships. Recognized for our climate-related initiatives across our faculties and research institutes, and our SUNY UWI Center for Leadership and Sustainable Development, the UWI was selected by the International Association of Universities to lead a global university consortium on SDG 13. Our Global Institute for Climate Smart and Resilient Development will combine climate science, mentorship and action, deepening our collaboration with diverse partners, connecting sustainable projects to funding and to the expertise of researchers and innovators. As a public, comprehensive institution, the UWI has never been daunted by limited means, nor by our vast responsibility to the region. Our allegiance is to continue as a developmental force to nurture the human and social capital, upon which the future of Caribbean society rests. Our young people are environmentally conscious and boldly persistent in holding decision makers accountable. Together, we can make the Caribbean the first climate-smart zone and an exemplar for other small island developing states. For us, tackling climate change is not only a priority, it is a matter of our survival.
Thank you very much, folks, and thanks to producers for this excellent, short, but very informative video of the UWI's successes. It gives me great pleasure now to welcome Dr. Sharon Slooney, who is Director of the Open Campus Country Sites and one of the key persons of the Open Campus leadership team. Dr. Slooney, over to you with your remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Charles. A pleasant good evening to everyone joining virtually, whether locally in St. Lucia or from across the region, for the opening of the GEF Small Grants Program, the UNDP's People Knowledge Fair, and the UWI Open Campus St. Lucia Country Conference 2021. Quite a mouthful. As we are aware, the theme of this year's conference is Visioning Sustainable Futures, Confronting the Threats of Climate Change and Climate Variability. The purpose of this conference is to fulfill the university's mandate to educate the public, as well as promote research and innovation as part of our mission to develop and maintain the sustainability of our contributing countries across the English-speaking Caribbean. Traditionally, in presenting the conference, we have partnered with sister organizations with similar research mandates. For the last 2 conferences, we partnered with the Folk Research Center, the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College, and the Monroe College. And on each occasion, the presentation stimulated and highlighted research on St. Lucia and provided an opportunity to share existing research and disseminate information about the host conference. Ladies and gentlemen, this conference is no exception. This year, however, we have joined forces with the Global Economic Fund, GEF Small Grants Program, the UNDP Knowledge Fair, and I'm pleased to acknowledge that this year, the GEF is a sponsor of this year's conference, and the UWI Open Campus extends its appreciation for this kind gesture. Given the particular theme and the partnership, there was actually a logical correlation between both organizations, given that we both share a common goal of uncovering, presenting, and documenting the most recent research that is conducted on St. Lucia with a view to seeking solutions to the existential threat to our collective futures, and which, ladies and gentlemen, we will agree is compounded by our socioeconomic inequalities. We need not look further than what has unfolded in the United States since 2016 in regard to climate change matters to appreciate the magnitude of our problems. As in previous years, we value the opportunity to create an environment for sharing, learning, and problem solving, a necessary step towards facilitating the management of indigenous knowledge for our own use, thus providing an avenue by which research in St. Lucia can provide solutions to local problems while also making a substantial contribution to the global discourse on climate change. Conscious of the need to lead, the UWI has taken steps to model environmental sustainability in its daily operations through policy, research, teaching, and outreach. And as you would have seen in the preceding video, a lot has been shared about the work of the UWI. Of much importance, however, is the fact that the UWI of 768 universities has been ranked among the top 200 for its work on Sustainable Development Goals 13. In August 2018, the UWI was also selected by the IDB, the World Bank, and Virgin Unite to host and launch the Caribbean Climate Smart Accelerator, which is a groundbreaking initiative to support the Caribbean becoming the world's first climate smart zone. This is remarkable, colleagues, if I might say so myself. Importantly as well, our students are not to be outdone. Equally active are a special group of UWI students who make up the Vice Chancellor's Student Today, Alumni Tomorrow group, which is known as the STAT Ambassador Group. And in April, they hosted a climate change forum themed The Eye of the Storm, the Implications of the Paris Agreement, Climate Change, and the Right to Life for Caribbean Youth. In closing, I wish to share with you that during opening remarks at that forum, our Vice Chancellor, Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, underscored the significance of the forum, noting that the climate change discourse will reveal the need for this region to address the fundamental issues of inequality, democracy, and social justice. All of those big issues, he attests, comes into the fore of the climate change issue. He continued that looking at the Caribbean 20 years from now, this is an opportunity to change the narrative about how our communities are built. As students, he implored them to take all the fragments of knowledge, all the fragments of scientific research and history, sociology, anthropology, and architecture, and forge it into a discourse of activism where they can speak truth to power and be persistent about it. Ladies and gentlemen, I implore you this evening to, over the next 2 days, forge into discourse of activism, speaking truth to power, so we may be persistent in our pursuit of addressing the existential threat of climate change and climate vulnerability in this, our beloved Caribbean region. As was noted in the 2020 launch of the GEF Knowledge Fair, it is against this background of decades of UWI activism in the field that the UWI Open Campus St. Lucia hosts its 2021 country conference, hoping to add its contribution to the ever-growing work of the UWI to envision a sustainable future for the people of the region. I thank you for your kind attention, and I look forward to your joining us over the next 2 days as our presenters generously share their research findings. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you and good evening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Slowly. And I want to join you as well in extending the invitation and also the welcome to those who are following on Facebook, for those who are following in other UWI territories apart from St. Lucia, as well as on YouTube. Organizing a conference like this has not been easy. The challenge of getting responses very slow, where people have been uncertain about even their own circumstances. So it has been a challenge for us. But one of the organizations, the partners, which has really reached out to the Open Campus, was the UWI Center for Biodiversity Studies, Biosecurity Studies, sorry, at Caveville. And they assisted in more or less mobilizing some of the presenters to really sign up for the conference. And as a result, we have a practically full slate of presenters for the next 2 days.
Wonderful.
Representing the center this evening is Ms. Christiane Walcott, the operations manager, and let me invite her to share some remarks and some greetings from the center with us this evening. Christiane?
Good evening, Chair, and thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I first bring greetings to you from Professor the Most Honorable Violet Udine Barito, Principal and Pro Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies Cave Hill Campus, and former Principal of the UWI Open Campus. She extends her very best wishes to the UWI Open Campus and offers special congratulations to the head and team of the St. Lucia Country Site for undertaking this very timely and relevant conference. The stark reality is, wherever in the world we may find ourselves, it seems that climate change is presenting an existential threat to lives and livelihoods on a daily basis. And this is certainly no different in the Caribbean. If we were to engage in a debate about cause and effect, one could perhaps argue that the Caribbean sits in a zone that seems to reap more than its fair share of extreme climate change consequences when considered against any active contribution on its own part towards climate change and particularly deleterious effects. What happens upstream eventually works its way downstream. Climate change cause and effect is analogous in this way. Melting polar ice caps will lead to rising sea levels elsewhere, with especially devastating consequences for low-lying coastal communities. The waste products of so-called dirty industries will be carried in the air and along watercourses, affecting air quality and water quality for populations miles away. And so for the Caribbean region that may not be an especially malignant actor in many of these respects, we find ourselves nevertheless having to address urgent and expensive efforts around prevention, mitigation, response, and recovery. More and more frequently, we are experiencing extreme weather phenomena in particular at an incidence rate that is much higher than perhaps the once in 50 years or once in 100 years that historical records would suggest. For small societies and small economies such as ours, there is now an undeniable imperative to conceptualize and execute on resilient, sustainable solutions to these problems. At the Center for Biosecurity Studies, we're concerned with the science and practice of safeguarding lives and livelihoods. Sustainability is a baked-in concept for us in every issue that we examine. Climate change and the region's capacity for adaptability and resilience are an immediate focal area for the center. And along with other immediate threats to the blue economy, as well as to border security, these constitute the primary tripod of priorities that our gaze is currently fixed upon. As we examine over the next 2 days what a sustainable future for the Caribbean looks like, and specifically so for St. Lucia, there are several components to consider. And having seen the program of presentations that awaits participants, the conference planners are to be highly commended for attempting to treat to many of the most emergent issues. Any sustainable proposition by its very design must include stakeholders from all 4 sectors. And what are those? 3 of them we are most familiar with, being the public, private, and NGO sectors. The 4th sector, which emerges, is indeed so named, the 4th sector. And this is the for-benefit sector. So therefore, we have public, private, not-for-profit, and for-benefit interests all seated at the table. And in so doing, we account for that much needed government policy and regulatory framework, in addition to private sector actors and community-based actors. All are necessary if anything is to be achieved, be it infrastructural improvement, policy prescription, or activity-based. All stakeholder elements must be present for any chance at creating and taking sustainable prevention and mitigation steps, and if needed, response and recovery efforts. Caribbean economies are vulnerable. The Caribbean environment is vulnerable. And for an economy that is largely sustained by its physical environment through industries such as tourism and fisheries, the environment and the economy are inextricably linked. Therefore, we have to be aware of phenomena that threaten terrestrial health and marine and nearshore health, and by extension, those phenomena which therefore become a threat to Caribbean lives and Caribbean livelihoods. The survival of the region depends on it. If the ravages of COVID-19 have taught us nothing else, it is indeed just how delicate and exposed our economies are, and how vulnerable they are to external shocks precisely because of issues of globalization and our interconnectedness and interdependence with international market forces. Beyond reinforcing our own healthcare systems, we have also learned that we need to find ways to feed ourselves in the event of further and future disruption to food production and supply chains. So something like COVID is not just a public health issue. There are wider biosecurity issues for the region that require us to think more broadly about sustainable and profitable diversification of our economies. And when we marry such issues with climate change consequences like increased frequency of heavy rainfall events, more active and more devastating hurricane seasons, and invasive phenomena like the sargassum influx or predatory species such as the lionfish that can single-handedly decimate a fisheries industry, it would be remiss of us not to study and respond to these developments with alacrity. Because even within these issues, we see that climate change and climate variability are not only defined in terms of weather and hurricanes. What of our warming seas? What is happening in the maritime environment to give rise to the changing ocean and nearshore ecosystems? The finances of Caribbean governments are all too often in a state of flux when we consider how much money is diverted towards disaster recovery each and every year. A single shock, instantaneous or prolonged, whether it be a one-off event like a hurricane or a slow-moving public health and economic disaster like COVID-19, will leave Caribbean economies and societies reeling for years to come, perhaps for generations to come. And being caught in this seemingly never-ending vortex of disaster and recovery comes at great cost both to individual national development plans as well as any steps towards regional progress. We as island nations, and we at an individual level, lose that fiscal space to improve our own lives and the lives of those who depend on us when we are constantly confronted by the physical and economic dislocation that so often results from hostile climatic conditions and their adverse effects. We are then left to ponder what gains are to be made or leveraged for Caribbean peoples under such circumstances, which brings us full circle to taking that inevitable view of climate change through a biosecurity lens and considering the myriad implications to the health and wealth of Caribbean lives and livelihoods over time. And so, without casting too much of a fatalistic shade on this issue, I commend all of these issues to all conference participants for individual and collective reflection as you listen to the presentations over the next 2 days. There's indeed much work to be done, as we've heard, and an all-of-society approach is needed to meet this moment. The Center for Biosecurity Studies continues to position itself as part of that vanguard that not only sounds the alarm, but stands ready to help facilitate change where change is needed. Time is short this evening, but I do encourage anyone within earshot of my voice or tuning into this conference over the next 2 days to connect with us and join your voices with ours as we step forward boldly in our advocacy campaign. Please do send us an email at the address biosecurity, one word, at cavehill.uwi.edu. That's biosecurity@cavehill.uwi.edu. Ladies and gentlemen, we wish you 2 days of successful presentations, and fruitful deliberations. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Christiane. We now turn our focus to an item with a little bit of a difference. You can recall in 2015 at the climate change conference in Paris, the Caribbean released a theme song that calls on the world to recognize and respect the claims of small islands in the face of climate change. And it was a multi-talented team from various countries. Script and lyrics were done by St. Lucian poet Kendall Hippolyte, the music composed by one of our top musicians, Ronald Bohingson. But it was, as I said, it was a collaborative effort which involved some reputed musicians like Banky Banks of Anguilla, Ace Locked of St. Lucia, Shane Ross, David Rudder of Trinidad, Taj Weeks, and also Derry D. Williams of St. Lucia. And it was a project supported by the Caribbean Development Bank and a number of regional partners. So now we'll just turn our focus to the short music video. And I invite you to just remember today's Carnival Monday in some parts of the region. You could tap your fingers, tap your foot, and move a little. We can't do as much as we would have liked to this year, but the music reminds us of the rich talents in the region that can be put to use in shaping messages that can make a significant difference to our lives and the lives of our people. So let me invite you to just join us and share in that video.
At the edge of rising water, we sing for our future.
Look out to where the sea meets the shore. I can tell you the sea is hungry, eating up our beaches more and more, swallowing our beloved country. The air's so hot above our land, poisoned with emissions,
and most of that is not made by us. They blow in from much larger nations.
Systematic toxicity, overeating our land and sea. Our waters rise to your economy, threatening our lives degree by degree.
Don't let it rise more than 1.5.
1.5 to stay alive.
Don't let it rise more than 1.5. No,
bring it down.
Don't let it rise more than 1.5.
1.5 to stay alive.
Don't let it rise more than 1.5. Before we're all gone.
I think of all these figures and facts and try and see into the future. I see the crops die and the rivers dry. There is drought and rising seawater.
I see our people fighting for food in islands that used to grow plenty. This future's not far away unless we are bound by a treaty.
Even though we can sympathize with struggling countries and their enterprise to lift their people up from mud to the skies, will you be with us when our waters rise?
Don't let it rise more than 1.5.
1.5 to stay alive.
Don't let it rise more than 1.5.
Bring it down, bring it down, bring it down.
I think about the suffering of the poor, the ones who are the most defenseless, the high and mighty ravaging the earth. They repay the price of progress. Economy is hot from burning oil. The rich on an eco rampage, destroying the lives of the poor. They refuse to pay loss and damage. The signs are here, we can't ignore. The waves of climate change have reached out.
Your half measures are killing the poor. It's climate justice we're fighting for. Don't let it rise more than 1.5.
1.5 to stay alive.
Don't let it rise more than 1.5.
Bring it down, bring it down, bring it down, whoa.
Don't let it rise more than 1.5. let it rise more than 1.5.
Don't let it rise more than 1.5. 1.5 to stay alive.
Bring it down, bring it down.
Don't let it rise more than 1.5. No.
Pas quitter la terre, venir plus chaud qui ça.
Excellent production. And if I wasn't the master of ceremonies, I would call for an encore. But I guess I don't have that power. Ladies and gentlemen, those of you who are on Zoom with us, those are joining us on Facebook, YouTube, and other media platforms, it gives me great pleasure now to introduce and present our featured speaker. James Fletcher was Minister for Public Service, Sustainable Development, Energy, Science and Technology in St. Lucia from 2011 to 2016. Under his leadership, the Caribbean's 1.5 to Stay Alive, a product of what you just witnessed, civil society campaign was developed in 2015 and helped create momentum in the lead up to COP, Conference of Parties 21. During the negotiations of the Paris Agreement on COP21, he was a member of a small group of ministers chosen to help achieve consensus on the Paris Agreement. In fact, he has been referred to by some, which I will not name, as one of our younger elders in the region. In recognition of his work, James Fletcher was highlighted in Profiles of Paris as one of the people who played an important role in creating the Paris Agreement. He's author of a chapter in a book on the inside stories in negotiating the Paris Agreement, which will be published by Cambridge University Press later this year. His alma mater. In 2019, James Fletcher was selected by the United Kingdom's Chevening Scholarship Program as one of the 35 global changemakers. James Fletcher currently manages his own consulting company, Soloricon. He's the author of the book, Governing in a Small Caribbean Island State, and he wrote the Regional Strategic Action Plan for Governance and Building Climate Resistance in the water sector in the Caribbean. Recently, he launched the Caribbean Climate Justice Project, which is an initiative aimed at increasing civil society awareness of impacts of climate change and ensuring that there are appropriate responses at the national, regional, and international levels to issues of climate justice and just transition. People, help me, join me in welcoming Dr. James Fletcher to deliver the keynote address at the opening ceremony of our conference. Dr. Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr. Charles. I am hoping that my slide is showing.
Yes, it is.
Okay, perfect. Distinguished invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, people who are viewing on YouTube and Facebook, good evening. Thank you very much for the invitation to deliver the keynote address at the opening of the GEF SGP Knowledge Fair and the UWI Open Campus St. Lucia Virtual Country Conference 2021. It goes without saying that the theme of this year's conference of Visioning Sustainable Futures, Confronting the Threats of Climate Change and Climate Variability is very dear to my heart. So when we speak of the threats, what exactly are those threats? Well, at some point, I'm sure we have all heard of the phrase greenhouse gases associated with climate change and the environment. What exactly are those greenhouse gases and why are they so important? The major greenhouse gases are carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, methane, and the fluorinated gases. Carbon dioxide is produced mostly when we burn fossil fuels, coal, natural gas, and oil derivatives such as gasoline and diesel to produce energy. It is also produced when we burn trees, solid waste, like when we use an incinerator, and from some chemical reactions, such as in the production of cement. We get methane produced as a byproduct of the digestion of livestock and from the decay of waste in landfills. Nitrous oxide is emitted from many agricultural and industrial processes, and also when we burn fossil fuels and solid waste. Fluorinated gases, the last major group of greenhouse gases, are synthetic gases that are produced from several industrial activities. These gases are referred to as the greenhouse gases because they rise and form a layer in our atmosphere that traps the heat that is radiated by our planet, and they prevent that heat from escaping into outer space. In fact, they re-radiate that heat back to the planet. The more greenhouse gases we produce, the thicker this layer becomes, and the more heat is trapped. They are called greenhouse gases because they function like the covering of a greenhouse. I'm sure if anyone has ever stood in a greenhouse on a hot day, you'll understand exactly what I'm talking about, because that greenhouse is hotter because the heat can't escape. It gets reflected back by the covering of the greenhouse. Understanding how greenhouse gases work is critical to our understanding of global warming, which is the warming of our planet that is caused by these gases. So when we speak of global warming, we speak of the warming of the planet that is caused by these greenhouse gases forming this invisible layer in the atmosphere that is causing heat that is coming out from the planet to be re-radiated back onto the planet. Climate change, however, is not the same as global warming. Global warming is one element of climate change, but climate change is the long-term, climate change describes the long-term changes in the climate of the planet that occur over time. It's probably also important at this point for me to explain the difference between weather and climate, because you very often hear people saying, well, you know, it's cold. How can we be talking about climate change when there's a snowstorm passing through the northeastern United States right now? Well, weather describes the immediate conditions that we experience. So the temperature, the rainfall, the snowfall, if you're living in a temperate country, the humidity, the wind speeds, the barometric pressure, that is weather. Climate describes the average of these things over a long period of time. So your weather can still be cold, you could still have wet conditions or dry weather conditions, but your climate, as what you look at as the average of those conditions over a period of time, is what we look at when we speak of climate change. Because of the industrialization of our global economies and the need to produce more energy to fuel all of these things that we want, these new products that we like to consume, the latest phones and everything else, we have to produce energy to power these processes. And the production of energy largely in the world is done by the burning of fossil fuels, coal, natural gas, diesel, and gasoline. So the more we have an industrialized environment, an industrialized economy, the more greenhouse gases we're producing. These emissions have been climbing steadily since the end of World War II, when the European countries set out to rebuild their societies. And the increase has become steeper as technology has made production easier and less labor intensive. Scientists suggest that the last time our planet's atmosphere contained this much carbon dioxide was during the Pliocene epoch, 3 million years ago. So that actually predates human beings on this planet. When Antarctica was a plant-covered oasis, sea levels were 10 to 20 meters higher. Global temperatures were on average 2 to 4 degrees Celsius warmer than they are right now. And in the Arctic, summer temperatures were 14 degrees higher than they are today. And again, for context, our species, Homo sapiens, evolved 200,000 years ago. And we're speaking about the last time we had those kind of high levels of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere was over 3 million years ago. So these carbon dioxide levels have never, ever been experienced on a planet inhabited by humans. Unfortunately, as greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere increase, global temperatures have also increased. And if you look at this graph, you'll see that the average temperature of our planet has been rising very sharply from the mid-1970s. Last year, we had almost a global shutdown as a result of COVID-19, unprecedented. Factories stopped, all activity ceased in most of our industrialized countries. And as a result, global carbon emissions were down by a record 7% in 2020. That was the equivalent of 2.4 billion metric tons of carbon emissions not being put into the atmosphere. That's significant, but did it have an impact on global temperature? Unfortunately not. 2020, last year, the year when we had a 7% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, 2020 was tied as the warmest year on record. So the warmest year since we have inhabited this planet, since we started taking records in the mid-19th century, 2020 was tied as the warmest year. And if we were to look at the warmest years since 1850, you will see that the last 7 years have been the 7 hottest years for our planet. 2016 and 2020 tied for the warmest, followed very closely by 2019, then 2015, 2017, 2018, 2014. So this shows very clearly that what we're experiencing is not some one-off anomaly, not some aberration, not some background noise that will go away. What we are experiencing is the relentless warming of our planet caused by our heavy production of greenhouse gases. So what does this all mean? Well, remember when I said that the last time we had so much carbon dioxide in our atmosphere was over 2 million years before human beings evolved, and that back then the temperatures at both the North and the South Pole were much warmer than what we have come to know them? Well, we are starting to see a return to these warmer temperatures in the Arctic and Antarctica. And if you look at this graph, you'll see that while global temperatures have been increasing, that yellow squiggly line, which is the temperature in the Arctic, has been increasing at an even higher rate and a more alarming rate than the global temperatures. Antarctica last year recorded its hottest temperature ever, 18.3 degrees Celsius or 65 degrees Fahrenheit. And a part of the world that is synonymous with jokes about people being banished there because of its harsh, bitterly cold temperatures, Siberia. Siberia last year recorded a temperature of over 100 degrees Fahrenheit or 37 degrees Celsius. Let that sink in. We have never in St. Lucia experienced 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Siberia experienced 100 degrees Fahrenheit last year. The impact of that is, unfortunately, polar ice caps are melting because our North and South Pole, as you know, because they're the coldest part of this planet, have glaciers and ice caps. But because the temperatures have been increasing so alarmingly, these polar ice caps are melting and sea levels are rising. We are currently seeing sea level rise at a rate that is much faster than what was anticipated. And all the studies are showing that our sea levels are rising much faster than expected. We expect that by the end of the century, sea levels will rise over 1 meter compared to present levels. Unfortunately, we're exceeding what should have been our worst case scenarios 50 years from now. And in 2019, it was observed that Greenland's ice is melting at a rate that scientists thought would be our worst case scenario by the year 2070. So just think about this. We are 50 years ahead of schedule for the worst case scenario for ice melting. And as I said earlier, by the end of this century, we expect sea levels to rise over 1 meter above present levels. For all of our Caribbean countries, this will have devastating consequences. The vast majority of our economic and social infrastructure is located within close proximity to our coast. A 1 meter plus sea level rise will put millions of people and hundreds of billions of dollars of infrastructure, social infrastructure, economic infrastructure, environmental infrastructure, will put all of this in danger because our juggler, our economic juggler, our social juggler is located very near to our coast. Now, in the event that you figure, okay, you know what, that's the end of this century, that's 2100, by this time, that's 79 years from now, by this time, most of us will be dead. Well, guess what? In St. Lucia, most of our cemeteries are located near the coast. So by the year 2100, yes, we will be dead. Most of us will be, and most of us will be supposedly sleeping in peace, but SIP might actually now come to stand for swim in peace or sink in peace, depending on how buoyant our bones are. Our cemeteries will be among the first to be inundated and eroded by sea level rise. Among the consequences of climate change will be more frequent flooding. Our water patterns will change. There'll be massive changes to the hydrological cycle, and all of the data are already showing this. There will also be longer droughts. We expect that there can be anywhere between a 15 to 25% reduction in precipitation in our region. So what you'll have are really more extremes of weather conditions. You will have extreme flooding at some points, and you will have long, sharp droughts at other points. So the weather will become a lot more unpredictable as a result of climate change. The weather, what we experience from day to day, will become a lot more unpredictable. And that, of course, will lead to greater water insecurity. And for all of our countries, maybe with the exception of Dominica, all of our countries are water insecure. We go through this period during the year from February to June, where we are in our dry season. And this, can you now imagine a 25% reduction in water availability during that dry season? That will cause serious water insecurity for all of us. Our oceans are beginning to warming up, because as the ambient temperatures get hotter, our oceans become warmer, and that is causing some serious problems. Corals are dying off, corals are bleaching because the temperatures are too warm, and it's also negatively impacting marine ecosystems and marine life. Also, as more carbon dioxide is emitted into the atmosphere, our oceans are absorbing more carbon dioxide. And basic chemistry 101, water, which is what you have in our oceans, mixing with carbon dioxide, causes something to form called H2CO3, which is carbonic acid. So the short of this is that our oceans are becoming more acidic as they absorb more and more carbon dioxide. As our oceans become more acidic, this causes, again, devastating consequences for marine life, for corals, but also for shellfish, because our shellfish cannot form their shells in acidic conditions. And in the Pacific Ocean, they're already realizing that the Pacific Ocean is becoming so acidic that the Dungeness crabs, their shells are melting as a result of ocean acidification. Food insecurity will become a bigger problem. Both land-based food production will be impacted by hotter temperatures, greater variability and scarcity in water supply, increased harmful insect activity, and the salinization of soils that are close to the coast. As you have sea level rise, some of your soils that are close to our coastlines will become more saline, more salty, and that will reduce on their productivity. And marine-based food production, as I just explained, will also be impacted by changes to both ocean temperature and acidity. We will experience more heat waves, and forests and bushfires will increase. And we're already seeing this. Last year, we had unprecedented bushfires in Australia, in parts of Africa, in South America, and the southwest regions of the United States of America. In a landmark study in 2009 by the Lancet Journal, which is a renowned medical journal, and University College London, climate change was identified as the biggest global health threat of the 21st century. The World Health Organization has predicted that between 2030 and 2050, we will see an additional 250,000 or 250,000 deaths per year from heat stress, malnutrition, and diarrhea caused by climate change. In India alone, it is projected that India could see 1 million heat deaths a year as a result of climate change. But climate change is going to impact our health sector in more ways than just the heat stress. We are expecting to see undernutrition, again, as a result of food insecurity, mental health issues, and anybody who spent some time in a country that has been devastated by hurricanes will know that the mental anguish that is caused anytime there's a pending storm, anytime there's a hurricane approaching, people go into a state of panic because they relive the experience that was just so recent and that traumatic experience. Cardiovascular disease, respiratory disease, harmful algal blooms as a result of the oceans becoming warmer, and also an increase in vector-borne diseases, because you have now, particularly mosquitoes, breeding some of the protozoans, for example, malaria, that is carried by the mosquito. It has a shorter period to adulthood, and you also have increased biting activity of your mosquitoes during warmer temperatures. So again, vector-borne diseases become a bigger problem. As a result of warmer temperatures and hotter oceans, we will see more intense and severe hurricanes. Now, very often you hear people say, well, there'll be more hurricanes. The data are not showing that there will be more hurricanes. What it's showing is that there will be more intense, more severe hurricanes. So we'll get more of these Category 5 and Category 4 hurricanes, or what we've been seeing, for example, what we saw in the time of Hurricane Irma and Hurricane Maria, hurricanes progressing from Category 1 to Category 5 status in a very short space of time. Our hurricane history in the Caribbean is already a very unpleasant one. And this really is a graph that I created using data from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration of a graphic of all of the storms that have passed through our region in the last 150 years. And you could see that our region has been victimized by intense hurricanes, even more so than the Pacific. We hear sometimes of the strong cyclones in the Pacific, but our region has experienced many more storms than that area. And scenes such as these from our sister islands are heart-wrenching, but very familiar during the hurricane season. So in short, our Caribbean countries are in a continuous cycle of repair and recovery. Half of all the economic losses that are seen across the world are because of storms and hurricanes. So if you were to quantify the loss and damage from disasters globally, you'll find that half of them are as a result of hurricanes and storms. And unfortunately, like most traumatic events, climate-related disasters are more fatal on lower income populations. And this really shows you what we've experienced in the Caribbean from some of the major storms in the last 40 years. Hurricane David and Frederick, over 100% of Dominica's GDP impacted. Dominica again was victimized just recently. Tropical Storm Erica in 2015, 90% of its GDP. Hurricane Maria, 226% of its GDP. And the BVI again in 2017, loss and damage equivalent to over 300% of the GDP of the BVI. The most devastating so far has been Hurricane Gilbert and its impact on Jamaica in 1988, where over 365% of GDP was the damage that was equivalent to over 365% of GDP. So when we say that climate change represents an existential threat to small island developing states, that is what we're talking about. The Caribbean is at the front line of the war against climate change. Therefore, we have a strong vested interest in the outcome of this battle. Our lives and our livelihoods depend on how successful we are in the fight. So I've presented the threats. What can we do? Are we powerless? Do we just have to stay there and accept whatever this relentless juggernaut called climate change brings to us? Or are there things that we can do to help ourselves and increase our resilience and our chances of survival? That really is the crux of tonight's keynote. I believe we do have a choice. I think the choice is a simple one, but the choice depends on the road that we take. We can continue along the path of business as usual with a largely extractive linear economic model that follows the path of take, make, and dispose, or we can move to a circular economy model where we use responsibly and sustainably, where we recycle as much of what we produce as possible, and we use the recycled products to make new products that we can use following the same cycle. So those are the choices. We continue with our current business as usual model, take, make, dispose, or we look at reducing, reusing, recycling. For this to happen, however, we have to drastically change the way we operate at all levels. Profound changes will be required at all levels of our society. We have to change threat to opportunity, and it's quite instructive that the Lancet, in a follow-up study in 2015, 6 years after it identified climate change as the biggest global threat to public health, identified tackling climate change as the biggest and greatest global health opportunity of the 21st century. And I believe for us, tackling climate change represents the biggest opportunity to develop lasting resilience and to pursue a sustainable development pathway. But first of all, we have to stop the self-inflicted damage. We have to stop shooting ourselves in the foot. There's an old Danish proverb that says, after pleasant scratching comes unpleasant smarting. This holds true in our case. Our love for the developments that bring us fleeting, pleasant, short-term goals is also causing us long-term grief and problems. There must be a departure from that model. We must build smarter, first of all. We cannot continue to put high-density, high-value infrastructure in places where we know will be impacted by sea level rise, flooding, or land slippage. That makes absolutely no sense. If we know that there will be sea level rise, if we know that there will be stronger hurricanes, why do we continue to put high-density infrastructure that most of it hotels or condominiums that will contain many people in a multi-story type of facility. Why do we continue to put these things in harm's way? Why do we continue to put these high value investments in the way of areas where we know will be impacted by these events? Why do we continue to allow people to build in areas that we know are prone to land slippage, prone to landslides, prone to flooding? We have to build smarter. We also must protect our land-based ecosystems. We continue to damage important ecosystems with senseless land clearing that destroys habitats, gets rid of valuable topsoil, creates slope instability, and causes problems both on the land and in the marine environment. This has to stop. We need proper land use plans that determine exactly what we can safely put where and how the land we have can support the development that we need. We must safeguard our mangroves and our wetlands, which create a buffer against storm surge, which filter out soil and sediment before they get into the ocean, and which provide a breeding place for important marine species. Destroying mangroves for development is counterproductive, harmless, and senseless, yet we see some of that happening in some of our member states. We have to invest in our water sector and make it more resilient. The water sector is perhaps the one that will be most negatively impacted by climate change. And we must do everything that we can to safeguard our watersheds. Already in St. Lucia, many of our watersheds have been seriously and in some instances irreversibly damaged by unsound agricultural, housing, and other infrastructural development. If we want to ensure that in the coming years of increased water scarcity, we will not be in a state of alarming water insecurity, we must protect and invest in our water sector. We must deal with our litter problem. Solid waste, particularly used plastics, are clogging watercourses, blocking drains, and exacerbating the flooding problem that we often experience after heavy rains. You know, some of the rainfall that we get right now that causes flooding is no different to the rainfall over the same period of time that our parents and our grandparents saw. The difference is the impact of that rainfall. And a lot of that is because we have waterways that are clogged. We have stripped our slopes of the vegetation that trap the soil. We've put on those slopes houses with rooftops that concentrate that water into small areas. So really, we again are shooting ourselves in the foot, both by the litter that we put that clogs up our watersheds, our watercourses, our waterways, but also by the development that we permit. As temperatures of water and water become scarcer, our primary rain-fed agriculture sector will be affected. Our farmers will suffer more and will become increasingly food insecure. We have to make prudent use of water for irrigation. We must protect our valuable farmlands and stop them from being lost to permanent non-agricultural uses. And we must support our agribusiness owners so that more of their produce and value-added products find a market in our supermarkets and shops. This is also good for reducing our carbon footprint, and I will explain how that works shortly. What used to be 1 in 50 and 1 in 100-year events are now becoming more commonplace. Public infrastructure like roads, bridges, schools, health centers, hospitals, and other public buildings must now be constructed to more resilient standards so that they can withstand the effects of heavy winds and heavier and more concentrated rainfall. In the case of our utility companies, this should include the undergrounding of cables that currently run overhead. This investment, although costly in the short term, pays itself off manyfold in the medium to long term, as it greatly minimizes the damage that is incurred by the utility company after extreme weather events, and it dramatically lessens the period during which people are left without service after one of these events. In developing resilience, it is very important that we pay very close attention to our health and education infrastructure. They serve very vulnerable populations, and we must ensure that they are resilient, they are built or retrofitted to standards that will allow them to be able to withstand the kind of events that we expect will happen in the future. The energy sector is inextricably linked with climate change. It is the burning of fossil fuels to produce energy that has primarily caused the high levels of greenhouse gases that we have in our atmosphere. Therefore, transitioning to the use of non-carbon renewable sources of energy and using appliances that are more energy efficient makes sense. It also saves dollars and cents because energy produced by fossil fuels is expensive since we have to import all of the oil products that we are currently using to produce energy. Two energy sources that we do not have to import are the sun and wind. We recently established a 3-megawatt solar farm in the south of St. Lucia. Feasibility studies have shown that wind is also economically viable. we must invest in these systems, and we should add battery storage capacity that will allow us to dispatch that energy when we need it, not just when the sun is shining or the wind is blowing. The transport sector is a major user of fossil fuel for energy. In fact, this sector uses more fossil fuel for energy in St. Lucia than the electricity sector. So it makes sense to transition this sector as quickly as possible to electric, but electric powered mostly by renewable sources. This is very possible in St. Lucia, especially with the introduction of solar powered charging stations across the island. And this has to be one of the goals of our government. One area that holds much promise and which would allow us to increase the demand for energy is the electrification of our ports, something that is known in the industry as cold ironing. When ships berth at our seaports, they have to keep their oil-based engines running to allow for the on-ship services to be powered. In the case of a cruise ship, the energy requirement while a ship is in port for one day can be as high as 12 megawatts. To put this in context, the peak demand on Lucia during the day for electricity by all consumers in St. Lucia is somewhere around 60 megawatts. So on a day when we have 3 or 4 cruise ships in port, the energy requirement to service these cruise ships, if we were powering them from our grid, is between half and 3/4 of the peak demand of the entire island. If our port authority were able to say to these ships that they could switch off their engines while in port in St. Lucia and power and plug into our national grid, this would represent a significant and valuable opportunity to sell power, in fact, export power to Carnival, Norwegian, Royal Caribbean, and all the other cruise lines that call on our port. If this power is being met by wind, solar, and geothermal, it means that we'll be able to sell power to the cruise ships and other ships berthed in our port at a rate higher than we sell to local consumers, but lower than these ships would incur if they kept their oil-powered engines running, and this revenue would return to St. Lucia. There is the added benefit that our air would be cleaner, because burning oil by the ship's engines releases particulates into the air around the ports. So this is a classic win-win scenario. The environment benefits, our economy benefits, and there are very significant returns to the cruise ship companies because they can now claim to be greener because for a significant period of their journey, well, the time that they berthed in St. Lucia, they are not using heavy oils or environmentally unfriendly fossil fuels. They are tapping into power that is being provided by renewable sources. We also should invest in early warning systems. In St. Lucia, we had secured financial grant support from the Italian government for a state-of-the-art hazard early warning system. This has to be commissioned because of where we're located, we will always be heavily impacted by extreme weather events. We need to give ourselves the capacity to forecast these events more accurately and early enough so that we can save lives and livelihoods. Early warning systems give us that ability. There is an old adage that a stitch in time saves 9. A 2019 report of the Global Commission on Adaptation demonstrated that the benefit to cost ratio of strengthening early warning systems is 9-1. This is a higher ratio than any other intervention and clear practical manifestation of the stitch in 9 saves 9 adage. For every $1 invested in early warning systems, there's a $9 benefit for the country. That's a no-brainer. Again, because we will continue to be impacted by extreme weather events, which we expect will become more severe with climate change, we must retrofit our emergency shelters so that they can safely accommodate the people who will be housed in them. These shelters should have solar-powered electricity with battery storage, adequate water storage, emergency medical supplies, and facilities that will allow men, women, and children to sleep peacefully. Our tourism industry will continue to be an important and perhaps irreplaceable element of our economic development. However, our tourism industry as it currently operates is a largely extractive industry. There is great opportunity for us to make the tourism industry sustainable with greater balance among economy, equity, and ecology. Our hotels can continue to make profits even while they invest in the people who work in the industry and play their part to protect the sanctity of the environment that they depend on for the range of services that they provide. This has to be the model of our tourism industry going forward. Anything else should not be permitted. One of the lessons that COVID-19 has taught us is that data and science matter. You can ignore the data, but that does not make it false, and that will not make the lessons it provides go away. Responding effectively to climate change and its impacts will require us to become more evidence-based. We have to stop making decisions based on whims, fancies, and as we say in St. Lucia, VAPs. When you have limited resources to deal with, this becomes even more critical. Our decision-making and policy formulation must be based on information and empirical data. Now, I'm sure that the obvious question that's going through your head after all of these things that I said that we need to do is how will all of this be financed? The fortunate thing is that there is a commitment by developed countries, which is enshrined in the Paris Agreement, for financial support to be provided to developed countries, which is enshrined in the Paris Agreement, for financial support to be provided to developing countries and climate vulnerable countries to help them adjust to the impacts of climate change through both mitigation and adaptation efforts. The commitment is a minimum of $100 billion annually from 2020. The international community has been slow in raising the full quantum of promised resources, and fundraising for climate and environmental projects was dealt a serious blow when then President Donald Trump withdrew the United States of America from the Paris Agreement. However, the re-entry of the United States of America into the Paris Agreement and the strong signals that have been sent so far by President Biden give us reason to hope that there will be recapitalization of instruments like the Green Climate Fund, and there'll be more money available for climate change, and we can start approaching that $100 billion annually that we were promised from 2020. However, even with that notwithstanding, there is still a significant level of resources available for climate finance. We need to aggressively go after these funds. The primary funding facility, the Green Climate Fund, has already committed $7.2 billion out of projects with a total value of almost $23 billion. This is supposed to assist 408 million people become more resilient. Unfortunately, in our CARICOM region, the only countries that have so far benefited directly from Green Climate funded projects are Antigua and Barbuda, with a $32.7 million grant for resilience in the building sector to hurricanes and the development of climate information systems and post-disaster responses. Grenada with a $42.8 million grant for its water sector, and Barbados with a $27.6 million grant to create a sustainable, resilient water sector in that country. So even while we cry that there's not enough money, we are not making use of the money that is available. And given that there has been a strong commitment by the developed world, both through the Paris Agreement, but also in 2015 with the Funding for Development Third International Conference on Financing in Addis Ababa, there are monies that are available that we need to take advantage of. We also need to look at the possibility, the option for debt for climate swaps. This allows us to get debt relief in exchange for specific action on climate goals. How they work is an agency, such as a non-governmental organization, an NGO, buys a certain amount of debt from the commercial bank at the face value of the debt on the secondary market. In exchange, the country whose debt has been cleared commits to financing a program that meets the objective of responding to climate change, but with payments that are lower than what they're paying in debt servicing. So again, it's a win-win scenario. The debt disappears, there's a lower requirement to find funds, but the funds that you are now using, you're using them for activities that benefit your country to become more resilient to the impacts of climate change. In 2018, the Seychelles government undertook such a program with the Nature Conservancy, the Global Environmental Fund, the GEF, and the United Nations Development Program, which saw $27 million of national debt being wiped out in exchange for protected marine parks, fishery management, biodiversity conservation, and ecotourism. We should also push for a carbon tax that goes into a global fund, such as the Green Climate Fund, for climate vulnerable countries for loss and damage and adaptation responses. A carbon tax allows us to provide a disincentive to the companies and to the industrialized countries from burning fossil fuels to produce energy. But we shouldn't be satisfied with this tax just going into the coffers of the country that is administering the tax. For this tax to have a double benefit, in addition to providing a disincentive for fossil fuel use, it should also be a source of financing for vulnerable countries, climate vulnerable countries, to finance climate change adaptation activities. One sector of our society that is staged largely outside of the conversation on climate change is the business sector. However, the business sector will be impacted in myriad ways by climate change, ranging from resource scarcity, changing demand for goods and services, increased capital and operational costs, and weakened production capacity. Our local business community must demonstrate better corporate environmental responsibility by supporting and engaging in actions that protect our environment. The recent voluntary phase out of plastic shopping bags by Massey is a move in the right direction, but we need to see much more of that being done across the private sector in our country and in many of the countries in our region. Sadly, as I've said previously, we'll continue to be negatively impacted by extreme weather events. This means that we must engage in risk mitigation whenever possible. One important risk mitigation tool is insurance. The Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility is a very good mechanism that has helped impacted countries in the Caribbean respond to the impacts of hurricanes. We need to develop other affordable risk mitigation tools for households and businesses, which cover the gamut of impacts. It is not just heavy winds or floods that can cause damage. To the farmer, a devastating drought can be just as catastrophic. So we need to pay attention to these things. At the diplomatic level, our governments must intensify the pressure on developed countries to curb their emissions of greenhouse gases. This must loom large in every conversation that we have as a government with our development partners. We cannot continue to pretend like the people who are giving us support are not also the ones whose practices, both historical and current, are fueling the problems that we're experiencing from a changing climate. This has to be part of the conversation that we have with our development partners every time we meet with them, because the current pledges and policies that we have on the table from the major industrialized countries will give us no better as a best case scenario than a 2.1 degrees Celsius warming of our planet, which is much warmer, uncomfortably warmer, dangerously warmer than the 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold that we have set. Unfortunately, biological systems do not operate in a linear manner. There are always feedback mechanisms. And that's why all of the climate models that have been done are running red hot. And we are underestimating the levels of sea level rise, underestimating the levels of ice melting, underestimating the levels of global warming, because all of these things have feedback mechanisms. And when one thing happens, it triggers something else. And that's why it's extremely important for our University of the West Indies to be at the forefront of climate change studies. We need a Department of Climate Change Studies at the UWI. I was very heartened to see in the video that was shown tonight of some of the work that is being done, but we need more than that. We need a department that is dedicated to collecting data and doing studies on the myriad ways in which climate change will impact lives and livelihoods in the Caribbean. Universities in parts of the world where climate change is not impacting people as forcefully and as dramatically as it is in the Caribbean have established full-fledged climate change programs and departments. What are we waiting for? It is not like our university is not currently doing work on climate studies. Professor Michael Taylor at Mona has done some excellent modeling work. And as I found out in 2018, when I delivered the feature address at the International Conference on the impacts of climate change on food and nutrition security that was hosted by the Faculty of Food and Agriculture of the St. Augustine campus, there are many departments in the UWI that are doing important work on climate studies. It's time for us to bring this together into a full Department of Climate Studies. And our University of the West Indies, which is the premier higher learning institution of our region and a highly recognized an acclaimed university in the world, has a responsibility to focus on the biggest threat that is facing our region. We need more climate champions, more people advocating for urgent action on climate change. Long before Greta Thunberg, our Caribbean youth were engaged through the Caribbean Youth Environment Network on climate change. Some of them were with us in Paris during COP21. They were a very influential part of our 1.5 to Stay Alive campaign. We need to give them more support. And this is something for both our governments and the private sector to embrace. But our young people also need to step up. They need to be as bold as Greta. You know, while I love what Greta is doing, I want to see Caribbean youth whose futures are more imperiled by climate change than that of a teenager from Sweden. I want to see our Caribbean youth on the international stage leading the charge for climate change. We also must never forget that we are island people. And as island people, we have a rich repository of local and traditional knowledge from which to draw. Our foreparents did a much better job of living in harmony with nature than we are doing. We need to tap into that rich wellspring of resources and use and adapt it to our present-day challenges. I'm assuming by now you've come to the inevitable conclusion that big lifestyle changes are required if we are to successfully confront the threats of climate change and climate variability. Therefore, I want to conclude this keynote address by looking at a few of the ways that each of us can play our part in responding to climate change. Most glaring one, we need to drastically cut back on our use of plastics. Not only is there high demand for plastics fueling much of the production that is taking place, and by the way, this photo was taken here in St. Lucia, but as I intimated earlier, plastics are worsening the impacts of climate change, particularly with respect to flooding. When we reach the point where we have large grotesque islands of plastic garbage floating in our oceans, and our marine animals are being found with plastics in their stomachs, you know that we've reached the point where urgent remedial action is more than necessary. It is overdue. One simple way is to buy and use a reusable water bottle. Simply fill that bottle up with cold water when necessary. These reusable water bottles look much cooler than the flimsy plastic bottles that we carry around with us, and they also keep our water cooler. And most importantly, they cut down on our use of plastics. Trees are good for the environment. They are excellent sinks for carbon dioxide. This means that they trap the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and they use this beautiful natural carbon sequestration process called photosynthesis to convert carbon dioxide into food that helps the plants grow, helps the tree grow, and produces the fruits and vegetables that we consume. The roots of these trees also help to bind the soil and prevent it from crumbling and being washed away. We need more trees, not less trees. A significant proportion of the heavy production that is requiring these large volumes of fossil fuels to be burned to produce energy is as a result of excessive consumption. We are buying large amounts of things, including foods, that we are not using and eventually throwing away. Let us commit to reducing overconsumption and consequently overproduction. Do not buy more than you need. The core benefit of this is that you save money because you don't buy things that you end up throwing away. Start a mini compost bin. Place all your fruit and vegetable waste in there. You can use the composted material in your kitchen garden. Again, this allows you to play your part in recycling. It also makes you realize just how much you're throwing away. And that reminder causes you to reduce on the wastage because you realize every week that you're putting so much into that compost bin that you really are buying much more than you're using. But it also gives you rich organic material that you can use to grow your own food. It saves money and is good for the environment. Earlier, I said that buying local and supporting local is good for the environment. The reason is simple. Locally produced goods, be this food or some manufactured product, have a smaller carbon footprint than imported products. The carbon footprint is a measure of the amount of carbon dioxide that was emitted by the various processes involved in making the product. For any imported product, a significant portion of its carbon footprint comes from the transportation of that product via air or sea from the country where it was manufactured to the country that is using it, in our case, St. Lucia. When you buy local, you eliminate the shipping portion of the carbon footprint. So you are supporting local business, you're helping to return some of those monies to our local economy, you're helping the environment, and you're playing your part to reduce the emissions of carbon dioxide. Next one is very simple. Turn off your car when you're idling for a long period of time. Some of the newer models of motor vehicles from some car manufacturers actually come with this feature, but you could do this on your own. You will save fuel, which in turn saves you money, and you will help the environment by reducing the demand for fuel and also releasing less harmful substances from the exhaust of the vehicle into the air that we all have to breathe. If you can afford to, buy an electric vehicle, although I know that these vehicles are still priced outside of the range of many of us. But even if an electric vehicle is being powered by our national grid, which is being powered by diesel generators, electric cars are more efficient and they will cause us to use less fossil fuel. So in running an electric vehicle, you are actually doing better for the environment, even if you're tapping into Lucia's diesel-powered grid. Now, as I said, I understand that many people can't afford the cost of an electric vehicle and there are not enough charging stations around the island. Hopefully, with time, this will change and both the prices of the vehicles will go down, particularly when a used market develops with electric vehicles, and the number of charging stations will increase. When this happens, I would encourage you to seriously consider changing to electric vehicles. Use more energy-efficient appliances and light bulbs. You will save money in the long run and the demand for diesel-powered electricity will go down. Invest in renewable energy. The most obvious way is to change your electric water heater, if you still have one, to a solar water heater. Your bank account will thank you and the environment will also thank you. If and when you can, you should also consider investing in a solar panel to provide electricity to your home. Although the upfront cost is still high, this investment will pay for itself after a few years, and when it does, everything after that is pure savings. Fix all your leaking faucets and pipes. Why should you pay for water that you're not using in a situation where water is becoming increasingly scarce? Again, this makes no sense. We do not have a problem with our water balance sheet in St. Lucia. Enough rain falls on our island to keep our rivers healthy, irrigate our plants and crops, quench the thirst of our animals, and service our domestic needs. The problem is we are not storing enough of our water. We need to change that. We need to start harvesting our rainwater. It makes no sense for Wasco to collect water, pump it to a treatment station, using electricity to drive the pumps, treat that water with chemicals and filtration to make it safe for drinking, pump that water to our homes, again using electricity to drive the pumps, only for us to promptly flush that potable water, that drinkable water, down the toilet, or to use it to wash our clothes, our cars, and water our plants. When we harvest our rainwater, we can use that harvested rainwater for the non-potable uses that I just described. For almost everything that I've spoken about in this last section, there's a common thread. It saves money, it is good for the environment, and it helps in the fight for climate change. We live in a part of the world where there's a regular, constant breeze and constant sunshine. Sunshine for at least 10 hours of the day. However, what do? We design our buildings, our homes, and our offices in such a way that we keep out the light and the fresh breeze. So we end up having to air condition our rooms and turn on light bulbs during the day. This crime is particularly prevalent in office buildings built by the government of St. Lucia. I don't know why we continue doing this. And the operating cost of these buildings is high. We need to stop this. We need to design our buildings so that we reduce the need for artificial cooling and lighting. Again, saves money, good for the environment. As much as possible, and in keeping with the theme of the circular economy I spoke of earlier, our culture should always be to reduce, reuse, and recycle. We need more people to care about these things. We need more people to engage and get involved. This is a fight for a cause that is not just important, but it's vital for all of us. There's a temptation to say that, I'm only one person, and this is a global problem caused by big international companies. That's true. It is a problem caused by big international companies, but that does not mean that each one of us cannot play and should not play our part, particularly when doing so redounds to our personal and collective benefit. Big things have always been achieved by small groups of people. That is the way of the world. And the more small groups get together to do things, is the bigger the impact. We must never lose sight of that. For that reason, we must make sustainable development and climate change issues that matter politically at the national and regional levels. Climate change is a matter of life and death. Bad decisions or decisions that disregard the science of climate change will cost us money that we do not have. It will damage or ruin livelihoods that are scarce now, particularly with the impact of COVID-19, and it will cause immense suffering and death. We must hold our leaders to account on these issues. Transitioning to a more resilient future requires us to transition to a development model that is sustainable. We cannot so selfishly pursue our current wants that we place in jeopardy the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. We have to strike the right balance among people, profits, and our planet. In developing our country, we cannot destroy its DNA, the very thing, the essence of what makes us who we are and what we are. The great thing about what I've discussed with you here tonight is that it will stimulate our economy because we'll be creating new spheres of economic activity. It will create new enduring jobs in areas that the world is moving towards. It will help us to save money, and it can also help in erasing some of the scary debt burden that we are accumulating. The proverbial icing on the cake is that we'll be helping to save our planet, and in the process, safeguard our future. The French philosopher, author, journalist, and winner of the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1957, Albert Camus, summarizes best what is the responsibility of my generation, our generation, when he said that each generation doubtless feels called upon to reform the world. Mine knows that it will not reform it, but its task is perhaps even greater. It consists in preventing the world from destroying itself. That is the responsibility of our generation. The choice in front of us, therefore, is actually much simpler than the graphic that I presented at the beginning of this address suggested. This is not a difficult choice between two unknown paths. This is a simple choice of staying on the current path that we have followed since independence, of running a society based on an extractive economy where we continue to take, oblivious of the consequences, and discard and dispose when we no longer have use for what we have taken, or we embrace a sustainable model, a more sustainable model, where we understand that people and the environment have value and they must be balanced. There must be balance among equity, ecology, and the economy. The simple point is that our climate is changing. Are we? Will we? These two paintings by Jonathan Gladding provide a chilling reminder of what our fate can be. For islands in the Pacific, where the tallest point is a little under 2 meters from sea level, this, what Jonathan shows in these two 1.5 to sea life paintings, will happen sooner rather than later. For some of us and some of our coastal communities, again, it will happen and it's starting to happen. As Ember Charles said during his introduction, I recently launched the Caribbean Climate Justice Project. If you want more information on climate change, climate justice, just transitions, or you want to contribute in whatever way possible to this cause, please visit the Caribbean Climate Justice on www.caribbeanclimatejustice.org or our social media pages. We'll be very happy to interact with you and see how we can help. Thank you very much for allowing me into your homes and offices today. I guess mostly homes. I hope nobody's still in the office tonight, particularly with us on the curfew, to speak on this very important subject. Thank you very much, Mr. Charles.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fletcher. I allowed the silence for a moment so at least we could internalize the very comprehensive presentation, lots of solutions. And I think what is critical about the presentation was that we didn't only focus on high-level policy solutions, but exactly what each of us can do. And I think that is where the action starts. As Bob Marley says in his song, one cocoa full basket. You cannot attempt to change the world around you if you haven't changed yourself. Or you cannot afford to change what is happening beyond you if you don't get into it. And I think there's a lot which has been presented to us, lots of food for thought, lots of information, and I'm sure some of the presenters will have some cues to take off tomorrow morning when they start their presentation. Some of them, I'm sure, may be tweaking some of the introductions or the segues as the case may be, because Dr. Fletcher did really cover a wide set of issues which lead to the central theme of visioning sustainable futures and the impact of climate change. Once again, Dr. Fletcher, thank you very much. And we hope that you could join us tomorrow at some point in time. And I'm sure that we will benefit from your wisdom as one of the younger elders among us in the area of climate change and climate justice. It's left for me to remind all our participants joining on the respective platforms that we continue tomorrow morning from 9 o'clock. And we have 6 presentations each day. We go until 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Our presentations focus primarily on climate change and the impact on the various sectors of our society, fisheries sector, also on the economy. There is also a presentation on looking at the work of renowned Guyanese poet Wilson Harris and the treatment of the environment, the treatment of landscapes in his language. And I think that should perhaps be of interest to us. Our presentations on Wednesday will continue on looking at the impact of climate change on the fisheries sector. We'll be looking at a bit about alternative energy, particularly solar energy projects and so forth. But as Dr. Fletcher had indicated earlier on, we are hoping that the discussions could lead to the issue of adaptation of these solutions to our current situation. It's one thing for us to discuss, but do we adapt sufficiently to make that change? We are under curfew and I wouldn't want to keep you beyond. We have a short dispensation to take us until 9 o'clock before we get home. So I don't want to abuse that privilege. So let me invite the Chloe Estava. Hope I got your name pronounced correctly. Chloe has a pretty long title. She's the Guild of Students Local Chapter Chair and Regional Vice President, Administration, Site and Service. So let me invite Chloe to deliver her vote of thanks. Chloe?
Thank you, Mr. Charles. Good evening, Dr. Francis Severing, Deputy Principal of the UWI Open Campus, Mr. Ember Charles, Chair of the GEF SGP UNDP National Steering Committee, Mr. Giles Romulus, National Coordinator, the GEF Small Grants Program, members of the UWI Open Campus leadership team, Dr. Cheryl Slowly, Director of Open Campus Country Sites, Mrs. Leslie Crane Mitchell, Acting Head UWI Open Campus St. Lucia, Dr. James Fletcher, former Minister for the Public Service, Information, Broadcasting, Sustainable Development, Energy Science and Technology, members of the GEF SGP UNDP National Steering Committee, heads, coordinators and staff of the UWI Open Campus Country Sites, Ms. Christiane Walcott, Operations Manager, UWI Center for Biosecurity Studies, Cayfield Campus, conference presenters, Ms. Joan Husbands, member, Caribbean Youth Environment Network, specially invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. I deem it a privilege to have been asked to extend a vote of thanks at this very important and timely conference. Once a great man whispered, feeling thankfulness and not expressing it is like wrapping a present and not giving it. So tonight, I take the opportunity to put my gratitude into words. Mr. Ember Charles, thank you for your tremendous support as a member of the Open Campus St. Lucia Organizing Committee and for your role as chair this evening. You did a wonderful job, to say the least. Dr. James Fletcher, one of the younger elders among us, for so readily accepting our invitation to be the keynote speaker tonight and for your very well put together, informative and eye-opening presentation. Thank you. Mr. Giles Romulus, thank you and the GEF SGP UNDP for partnering with the Open Campus and for sponsoring the conference. This couldn't have been made possible without you. Dr. Slowly, Director of the Open Campus Country Sites, thank you for so ably highlighting the UWI's decades-long dedication to achieving climate resilience. Ms. Christiane Walcott, for your eloquent discourse on the dangers of climate change this evening and for your active role in sourcing presenters for our conference. We extend a heartfelt thank you to you. I also want to extend my gratitude to you, Ms. Darrell Dubois, for your support and for praying for all of us tonight. Members of the local organizing committee, thank you for your support in pulling the conference together and for assisting with encouraging persons to participate. And to all our presenters, thank you. Thank you for your dedication to research on St. Lucia and the region, for answering our call and putting in the hard work to enable all of you to make your presentations. Without all of you, there would be no conference. Additionally, I would like to extend our deepest gratitude to our regional UWI technicians, in particular, Mr. David Foster and colleagues, and our local technicians at the Open Campus, Mr. Miguel Felix and Kevin George. Special thanks to all those involved in advertising the conference. Axela Marketing and Mr. Yuthani Bryan, thank you for your hard work in advertising the conference on our Open Campus St. Lucia page. And last but not least, thank you to everyone who joined us this evening. The aim of the conference is to build awareness of the need to build resilience to the negative impacts of climate change. We are very grateful that you took the time to tune in, and we hope that you learned something and you are ready to be an advocate for our climate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chloe. And let me add a word of thanks to Richmond Felix, who has been in the engine room. Nobody sees him, but a lot happens because of his own role. And ladies and gentlemen, folks, you've just been following the opening ceremony of our conference, Visioning Sustainable Futures, Confronting the Threats of Climate Change and Climate Variability. This evening, we had the feature address by Dr. James Fletcher. Our conference continues tomorrow, and we invite you to join us on Facebook, the Open Campus Caribbean Facebook page, and of course, the UWI Campus live stream on YouTube. I promised you early on when the first song came on that you should be tapping your feet and twiddling your fingers. It was the slower of the calypsos, but now you will get the up tempo, and as Bungie Garlin would say, party over, follow the truck. So let me invite you to follow the music video that has been prepared, that was prepared for the 1.5 campaign, a much up-tempo version, 1.5 to stay alive. Ladies and gentlemen, have a wonderful evening and see you tomorrow. Good night.
Yo, Alpha,
Monster.
This one is global.
1.5 to stay alive. Caribbean people are survivors on the line. We can't afford to waste time. That's 1.5 to stay alive. We should be no warning. Then we come together to fight against global warming. Cause we can't afford 2 degrees increase. All the policy makers have to consider this. Yeah, we must keep it under 1.5. Climate change is a serious thing, so we got to do what is right and hold it down. The temperature, hold it down. It's too much heat, hold it down. Natural disasters on the increase, hold it down. Sea levels rising, hold it down. Mother Earth is crying, hold it down. We must do something now. 1.5 to stay alive. Caribbean people are survivors on the line. We can't afford to waste time. That's 1.5 to stay alive. We should be no warning. Then we come together to fight against global warming. Yeah.
We in the Caribbean and other island states across the Indian, Pacific and Atlantic Ocean are particularly vulnerable to the adverse effects of climate change. Although we contribute least to global warming, we are likely to suffer most from its adverse effects. So join the movement and let your voice be heard. We cannot allow global temperatures to increase by more than 1.5 degrees.
No. St. Vincent, Grenada, hold it down. St. Kitts and Antigua, hold it down. Martinique, Jamaica, hold it down. Dominica, yeah, hold it down. In the Indian Ocean, hold it down. In the Pacific Ocean, hold it down. From Mama Africa back to St. Lucia. 1.5 to stay alive. Caribbean people are survivors on the line. We can't afford to waste time. That's 1.5 to stay alive. We should be no warning. Then we come together to fight against global warming. Hold it down. Unleash creativity and innovation. Unleash community spirit.
The People's Knowledge Fair and the UWI Open Campus St. Lucia Country Conference 2021 Phase 2 presents Visioning Sustainable Futures, Confronting the Threats of Climate Change and Climate Variability. Tune in to the live opening. Join our virtual conference on the 16th and 17th. That's not all. Experience St. Lucia's first National Honey Bee Show Training Workshop on the 15th and 16th. Come learn from a leading international expert everything you need to know to compete in December in our first ever National Honey Show. Registration is open now. The People's Knowledge Fair and UWI Open Campus St. Lucia Country Conference is brought to you by GEF SGP UNDP, UWI, CYEN, and other corporate partners.